Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Colonel Rob Hensley. I'm the Chief of Staff for the new Joint Counter Small UAS office, the JCO. And I really look forward to the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the JCO and some of the things that we have ongoing, as well as a little bit of a discussion with you. What we thought we'd do is to kind of set the stage, just talk a little bit about the current threat and the establishment of the JCO. So with that, if we could go to the next chart, please. So as you're aware, the U.S. is facing a variety of threats, everywhere from the strategic near-peer competitors to regional powers, failed weak states, criminal organizations, and even hobbyists who present a hazard to some of our critical infrastructure and operations. And these competitors are leveraging that really fast emerging technology that we see with UAS across all domains and all geographical locations. This isn't just a problem in the homeland or in a particular spot around the world. It's truly across all geographic regions. And these adversaries are really representing this rapidly proliferating, it's low cost, high reward in areas of ISR threat, as well as lethal attack threat to our personnel, material, and interest throughout all operating areas. And you can see General McKenzie's quote up there, where he talks about the UAS threat really being the most concerning tactical development since the IED. And that's the way that we look at it here in the JCO. That really fuels our efforts moving forward in the development of those counter capabilities, as well as those other areas of training and doctrine and policy that we'll talk a little bit more about. So in response to this threat, the Department of Defense designated the Army to be the executive agent for the Joint Counter Small UAS that includes groups 1, 2, and 3. And that's on the lower end of the scale of those UASs. And you can see that highlighted in red there on the chart. So if you go to the next chart, please. The Secretary of Defense assigned the Army, as the executive agent, certain responsibilities to research and develop those capabilities that will be able to counter those smaller UAS groups, and to do so with the funding and the expenses and the budgeting to be equitable across all the military services, to reduce that redundancy that we had seen at the beginning of this really explosion of technology and the race to counter it. So the Secretary of the Army then stood up the Counter UAS office, did so under the G357, under a 2-star directorate, and did so with the responsibility to lead and direct the joint force in this space, and specifically to really focus on training, doctrine, material development, as well as requirements. And the intent was to really establish a enterprise approach, if you will, to combating this problem and to ensuring the protection of U.S. personnel, material, and interest wherever we are operating throughout the world, and to do so against this rapidly increasing UAS technology. So also on the chart on the bottom right to your left, are some of the focus areas of the JCO, and I'll just highlight a couple. We've got a couple of teammates here that'll get up and talk a little more in depth about some of them. But I did want to highlight the Department of Defense Joint Counter UAS Strategy and Implementation Plan that was approved by the Secretary of Defense earlier this year. That really provides the direction for all the services in this particular space. Additionally, wanted to highlight the operational requirements document, and that was put together by Colonel Morgan and his team. It was really the first time that the DOD put the counter UAS mission set into one unifying document, and that document does quite a few things. To include, it's something that we can hand to industry so they can see what are those system requirements, what are those C2 operational requirements as we move forward. And so Colonel Morgan and Colonel Soleil, who are with me today, they'll also discuss a little bit more on those requirements, on the training and doctrine, and on the initial systems. So what does the JCO look like? If you go to the next chart, please. So on the right side of this, this chart, you can see kind of the structure of the JCO. It wouldn't be a brief without a line and block chart. So under General Gainey's leadership, the JCO is comprised of 5 different divisions. You've got your operations division, you've got your acquisition and resources division, strategy and policy, as well as requirements and capabilities, and then we've got a joint integration division. So several of our divisions within the JCO have representation from all the services throughout to ensure that it is truly looking out for the joint collective needs of the department. Also, if you when the chart comes back up, you'll also see as part of the JCO, not one of its divisions, but still falling under Major General Gainey is DAMO Fires, and that's that traditional Army staff organization that really leads the synchronization of fires for the Army staff. And the reason why it was put under his leadership is because it really closes that seam between the small, counter-small UAS, groups 1 through 3, and the larger groups 4 and 5 that are really defended against by traditional air defense assets. Just next to the structure, you'll see the our governance process. And we established this process across all the services, as well as other DOD organizations. And like many governance processes, you can see where it starts at the working group level to general officer committees. But what I want to highlight is the structure that the culminating Joint Counter-Small UAS Executive Steering Committee, and that's co-chaired by the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, as well as the Undersecretary of Acquisition and Sustainment. This governance process, it's important to note that it includes all the services. It includes multiple DOD organizations, and often we get other interagency organizations that do come and participate in this governance process. So if you go to the next chart. Just a little bit about some of the ongoing initiatives and some of the things that we're looking to in the future. Since the establishment of the JCO, we've had really several major milestones achieved. In addition to the strategy and the implementation plan that was mentioned earlier, the organization down-selected to 10 initial systems from currently fielded systems. And Colonel Soleil will talk a little bit more about that. But in that process, we established that baseline of systems for the joint force that'll engage and defeat, detect counter-small UAS groups 1 through 3. Also established a process and established semi-annual demonstrations that are ongoing. And that really is all about bringing on new solutions, material solutions, non-material solutions. As we all know, this space and this technology is evolving so rapidly. We can't be pigeonholed into a rigid process, so we're developing ways to onboard to ensure that we're getting the latest technology to the warfighter. There's still a lot of ground to be covered, but we're doing a great job building the counter-UAS team. We work with other interagency partners, the FAA, FBI, DOJ, Capitol Police, you name it, we're going to work with them. And some of the major areas that we collaborate with those interagency partners, and as well as the services and other DoD organizations, is information sharing. It's that common operating picture. It's that threat assessment that's so important. All these different organizations may have different processes and different capabilities to gather information. So how do we bring it all together? It's hard on. Another area is the monitoring the small UAS incident reporting. Okay, there's a command and control of the information environment, and by ensuring that we're monitoring that, we're able to analyze and really identify those trends and those new capabilities and those new TTPs that are out there to ensure that the problems that the warfighters are bringing to us and the warfighters are seeing. There's also quite a bit in the field or the area of training and doctrine. And so with that, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about that particular space.
Thanks, Rob. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Colonel Dave Morgan, the Requirements and Capabilities Division Chief for the JCO. of that, to put a little context. So some of our early assessments back when the identified a lack of institutional counter-UAS training as one of the primary insights. So lack of joint linkages or commonality, counter-small UAS training across the department. And the average soldier, airman, Marine lack of UAS training, and what was typically provided by mobile training teams and typically completed in range without any type of training associated with it. So that's a context that sort of drove the joint institutional training, which sought to one, refine and improve an educational baseline throughout the joint force, create and share identification level of the joint training enterprise, and then providing opportunities for that joint force as well. So our bridging strategy, until we can get to that institutionalized counter-small until we get it established, we leverage the instruction that's currently being done at the Human Improvement Council. Second, to make available a basic level of instruction to every joint warfighter, and then also to establish common core modular lessons that can be included by the services at every level of their professional military education. And then to revise the joint doctrine and pursue establishment of the multi-service tactics, techniques, and procedures, MTTP, publications, to share those best practices for employment of counter-small UAS. So finally, our long-term objective is to create that institutionalized counter-small UAS academy that I referenced earlier, to standardize best practices and refine joint common core lessons, to create counter-small UAS subject matter experts throughout the joint force, and then to teach counter-small UAS courses from basic all the way through advanced employment principles in a tiered educational construct. Our next two major milestones, as you can see depicted on the slide here, on that path are the Critical Task Site Selection Board, or CTSSB. Joint counter-small UAS capabilities that Colonel Greg Slay is going to talk to you about will be well represented in that training as well. Greg.
Thank you, Dave. As mentioned, I'm Colonel Greg Slay, and after the JCO was stood up, the Army's Rapid Capabilities and Critical Technologies Office, or RICTO, under to provide materiel support to the JCO. Within the JCO, I lead the Acquisition and Resources Division at the approved operational assessment and currently fielded counter-small UAS capabilities. The JCO conducted a down select of counter-small UAS capabilities to identify those systems that were best suited to remain in active use and focus additional R&D investments. Next slide, please. The systems you see here represent a variety of capabilities across the detect, ID, track, and defeat kill chain, and they're grouped by modality into fixed, mobile, command and control, and then dismounted handheld. In accordance with our acquisition approach, as you can see by the color coding listed to the right-hand side, we assigned a service as Joint Capability Lead, or JCL, to continue managing each of these programs and consolidate procurement and sustainment contracts. We arrived at these 10 initial joint capabilities as a start point to a future system of systems approach. Subsequent funding requests were submitted to address known system limitations and include modifying and improving them for interoperability under a system of systems approach, or prototyping new components to enhance current capabilities. I'll now turn it back over to Colonel Dave Morgan to discuss our requirements and path forward. Next slide.
Thanks, Greg. Hey, so our joint counter small UAS operational requirements are outlined in a Joint Requirements Oversight Council Memorandum, or JROCM. It's the first time that the DOD has brought together the counter small UAS mission set under a single unifying document. Now, these operational requirements are intended to provide strategic direction to the Department of Defense for counter small UAS capability development, and it was signed late September of last year. So as part of the effort to develop the joint operational requirements, we worked across all of the services, combatant commands, and multiple other agencies to develop requirements that provided the greatest amount of flexibility to accomplish three things. We wanted to codify existing requirements as we transition capabilities away from the JUONS and GEONS construct, the Joint Urgent and Emergent Capability Needs construct. We also wanted to provide industry with guidance on where the Department of Defense was going. And then finally, we wanted to provide overarching requirements to the service capability development documents, or CDDs and the like, to point back to as they develop capabilities needed to enable missions in their respective domains. So the requirements, just like Greg said, were structured in a base document and three annexes, each for the fixed, semi-fixed, mobile, and dismounted modalities, as he mentioned. So the base document identified the requirements that are applicable across all of those modalities, while the annexes outlined specific requirements to enable the creation of that family of systems that Greg mentioned. So we structured the requirements into 6 primary bins that are depicted in the blue box there on the left. So command and control, or C2, really serves as the enabling capability for our efforts and was built into our requirements document for that modular open system architecture to enable integration and interoperability, which is a big deal for us, obviously. So we expect that our interoperable C2 path will then enable the componentization of detect, track, ID, defeat, and exploit capabilities by enabling a plug-and-play componentization to establish sort of a tailorable defense design to rapidly integrate those new technologies as they come forward. So just like Rob mentioned earlier, so our DOD directive charges the JCO to lead efforts to coordinate the identification, prioritization of joint gaps and solutions, and to coordinate joint requirements for counter small UAS capabilities to minimize duplication and redundancy. So over here on the right, sort of the second slide in the back, you can see the what we call the Joint Counter Small UAS Strategic Portfolio Analysis and Review. You'll often hear it referred to as JC-SPAR. It's really a big part of how we do that. It's a repeatable, collaborative process that's intended to identify, define, assess, integrate, and then advocate for desired counter small UAS capabilities that support our requirements. So this process establishes a deliberate and disciplined process to coordinate efforts supporting both material and non-material solution development sort of 3 years out. We actually just completed our first full cycle of this annual process and continue to make improvements to it for this next cycle, which will begin in the December timeframe. So now that the JC-SPAR, so the JC-SPAR is the deliberate and enduring process for introduction of new capabilities. However, you can see here, again on the right, the slide in the front, we are also working on what we affectionately call an on-ramp process that allows for the consideration of those capabilities that were not assessed and or not selected as part of the original reduction of fielded capabilities, again, that we referenced earlier. So let me say up front that this effort is still under development. It's pre-decisional, but if approved in its current version, it would allow capabilities to be assessed through the governance process that Colonel Hensley mentioned earlier, based on an operational assessment and supporting data associated with that assessment for inclusion in the initial counter small UAS capabilities that Colonel Soule just spoke with you about. And with that, I'll actually turn it back over to Colonel Soule, who's going to talk you through the demonstrations.
So as part of the JC-SPAR process that Dave just mentioned, and to ensure the most capable equipment is provided to operational forces, next slide please, the JCO, RICTO, and the services will host industry demonstrations twice a year to evaluate emerging technologies that close gaps, inform requirements, and promote innovation. My team, with close coordination and support from the services is planning and executing a series of semi-annual demonstrations where we want industry to come show us their products that help solve our capability focus gap areas that we identify throughout the JC SPAR process. We've heard from numerous industry partners that they're ready to show us what capabilities they've developed or improved using their own R&D dollars, so here's their chance. We intend to provide future recurring opportunities to industry on a semi-annual basis, each with its own designated focus area. The inputs, as you see on the left-hand side of the chart, are focus areas from identified capability gaps, leveraging innovation and existing evaluation efforts where feasible. The outputs on the far right are actionable data that can be provided to an assigned service lead to inform requirements and development or procurement strategies. Next slide, please. The first such event took place in April of this year at Yuma Proving Grounds in Arizona in collaboration with the Air Force as service lead and focused on low collateral effects interceptors. The demonstration supported future development efforts to field capabilities where countering small UASs requires minimal collateral damage to the surrounding environment and personnel. The second demonstration event just recently wrapped up in September, also at Yuma Proving Grounds, and working with the services, we evaluated ground-launched aerial denial and handheld dismounted solutions. The ground-based aerial denial solutions are ground-launched with no in-flight terminal guidance, providing denial or defeat of a single or multiple small UAS. The handheld solutions are capabilities that are either held or attached to a service member or weapon while conducting dismounted operations. The JCO received 49 white papers from 39 industry partners to include 28 small businesses and 17 non-traditional vendors. Qualified submissions were split between the two topic areas and included kinetic, energy, and RF effectors. Based on white paper reviews by a joint panel, 21 systems from across both focus areas were selected for oral presentations. And after oral presentations, 10 total systems were selected and invited for demonstration over the 3-week period at Yuma Proving Grounds. Due to COVID impacts and supply chain issues, 5 companies had to drop out at the last minute. All submitting companies were notified of their selection for demonstration with the potential contract opportunity following, or provided reasons for non-selection with information about future opportunities. Future demonstration events will be conducted semi-annually at a common test range using common test procedures as the JCO coordinates with joint partners to identify these focus areas providing the most impact for transitioning solutions to our warfighters. This concludes our brief. I'll pause for any additional comments from Colonel Hensley or Colonel Morgan, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Great. Hey, thanks, Colonel Soleil. Okay, so that was pretty quick, but we welcome any questions you may have or any comments, please. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. If you could hold on one second, sir. We've got a microphone.
Yeah. Are your slides going to be available?
Yes, absolutely. The slides will be available, and just also for most of you in your seats, there was a trifold that gives some points of contact as well as some information about the JCO and what we do. And if you need more, just see us right afterwards.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Are the COCOMs getting the same information directly, or are the services expected to provide it to the COCOMs?
No, great question, sir. And the COCOMs are involved in that governance process that we talked about. So much of the input that we get and the feedback is directly from the COCOMs. And I would even add part of the JCO, one of the things that comes out of the operations division is what we call a rapid response team. In so many cases, if there's an incident, we can dispatch this team, and the team is, the makeup will depend on what they're going to take a look at. But they can go take a look at, what happened, help with the analysis, and, provide an immediate feedback on things like, setting up command and control, that system of systems to ensure there's a good layered approach, as well as some of the TTPs that we can help share amongst the COCOM. So absolutely, sir, they are involved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
For your next semi-annual industry demo, when and where will that take place, and what will be the focus areas for this next one?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll let Colonel Soleil.
So right now we're planning on having that in the April timeframe. We're looking strongly at human proving grounds again, but not yet final decided. And the focus areas that we're going to be looking at are high power microwave and counter small UAS as a service.
Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to ask, how are you looking at counter UAS capabilities moving from a forward deployed kind of mindset to near peer competition? And I know you mentioned some of the capabilities you would use within the U.S. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you just clarify that statement? How are we looking at going from
Forward
more of a forward
deployed
deployed
kind of mindset to preparing
the homeland?
CUAS for near peer competition, and also you mentioned kind of capabilities would be designed to work in the U.S.
Yeah, so I'll touch on the homeland piece first. So it talked a little bit about that interagency partnership and that team that we're trying to build. And so a big part of that are the authorities that are allowed or not allowed within the homeland, in particular around our installations where we need to be able to train and exercise these systems. So we work very closely with the FAA, the TSA, to ensure that those 130I and 124 and authorities are understood, and that we ensure that we know what we can and can't do on the installation and the immediate ground or immediate area right outside the installation. Obviously, some of these capabilities can have a further reaching impact, and we certainly don't want to have any negative impact on the national airspace with civilian flights and things like that. So that coordination with those interagency partners is really how we're building that site picture and how we're going to operate here in the homeland. As far as the downrange, again, that goes back to some of the processes we have, and I'll turn it over to Dave Morgan as far as his JC SPAR process, as far as that requirements process that he has, where we get some of the input that I think you're talking about. And if not, please we'll give you a chance to clarify after.
Thanks, Rob. That's a great question. And one of the challenges, obviously, that we face, and I think Rob alluded to it earlier on in the slides, is that this ubiquitous nature of small UAS. It's not just a forward deployed issue. We're experiencing it everywhere. So I can tell you from a capabilities and requirements perspective, we're really threat actor agnostic, if that makes sense. So we're looking at the capability. It could be within the spectrum of a hobbyist on one end out to a state actor on the other end. So, but from a requirements perspective, we're looking at the capability. And then those emerging capabilities we then try to address with the JC SPAR, as Rob mentioned. If it comes up that it's we're seeing it in multiple areas through multiple organizations, then it gets rolled into our joint look, the JC SPAR, and if it comes out to be a threat, a capability gap, we'll codify that and then hand it off to Greg and his team to start working solutions. I don't know if that answered your question.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hey, sir. Thank you very much. Mario Wesser, DevCom, Armament Center, Picatinny. I just had a question. How do you see the kinetic and hard kill counter UAS strategy progressing from a tactical edge perspective? As you know, currently from 0 to 3,000 meters, there are no requirements for the brigade to have a hard kill requirement outside to have the utilization of a Stinger or CRAM. How do you see more capability being pushed down to the team level or to the soldier level? Thank you.
Great question. As we're developing these material solutions, one of the things that the JCO is also tackling is, what's the rest of the story? How are we going to fight? How are organizations equipped? What's the training involved? And we touched a little bit about the training and the doctrine. We don't see a specialized MOS that's dedicated to counter small UAS. It's every Marine is a rifleman. Every soldier is also a part of that counter small UAS fight. And what I'll do is I'll open it up to Colonel Soleil and Colonel Morgan to see if they've got a little bit more on that as they go through their particular areas.
So of course, I'm answering things from a very specific perspective from the Requirements and Capabilities Division. So for one thing, I would say that really from our division, we're looking at things from a RD-T&E lens. So we acknowledge and we understand that things have to happen downstream of that to actually get it in the hands of the soldiers, like you were talking about, down to the lowest level. To further complicate it, as a joint organization, it's got to percolate up through the services or the combatant commands as something that more than one agency is looking for. So I can tell you, without getting into specifics, that we do actually have capabilities out there that are present in the force, that are being used and being used effectively. So again, from a requirements capability perspective, what we try to do is look at the threat, where it's going, and then anticipate that. If that means that we're looking at kinetic or hard kill capabilities beyond the 03K, then that's where we will focus our efforts in the planning spectrum, like 3 years out. I don't know if that answers your question.
Hey there. Can you speak to how you're evaluating and ultimately selecting the solutions at the
I'm sorry, where's the question come from?
Over here, on the left. or
Okay,
right.
got you. Sorry about that.
Can you speak to how you're ultimately evaluating and selecting solutions at the industry demos?
Yeah, sure. Greg, you want to field that?
Yeah, so I mentioned that the process that we've put in place, and let me go into just a little bit more detail. So when we start the process for each of these semi-annual demonstrations, we start with either a request for white papers, request for information, request for proposals, something that goes out as a solicitation to industry that tells them, here's what we're looking at, here's what our dates are, here's the capability focus areas that we're going to get after at this next industry demonstration, so that industry can then look within their portfolio, and if they have a product that might meet that need, then they can get ready to submit a white paper to start the process with us. In that solicitation, we also lay out how we're going to evaluate their proposal, and then if selected for oral presentations, then how we're going to evaluate those as well. And then as we start to get through the selection process and we put more rigor behind the test plan, then we also share that with industry partners on the metrics that we're going to be using at the demonstration, which first and foremost will come out of our requirements document to make sure that we're filling a capability gap that we have from what's identified in our requirements document as compared to what we currently have out in the field. Whether we're trying to improve on something that we have today because we don't have something that fills a gap, or we have something that fills a gap but we want to fill it better, faster, cheaper, and we'll share that with industry, and then to make sure that they know what we're looking for at the event, and then we'll share with them a report afterwards to make sure they know how their product compared against those metrics.
Thanks, Colonel Salai. I think we are about out of time. Okay, so we got time for one more question. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Oh, hi, Valerie Insena with Breaking Defense. Thanks for taking my question. I wanted to ask about the second demo. So now what comes after that in terms of, figuring out whether those technologies move forward and become part of a bigger program? And then also, you mentioned that about half of those that were selected out of the 10 were not able to come to the demo due to COVID. Do you expect that that's going to be a recurring problem as demos go forward, or do you think that this was sort of just a one-off just because of the spike with Delta?
Well, for your first question, what's next? I can't get into too much because we're still evaluating the data, and the report's not ready yet to be released to our government community or to the industry partners that were there. But in general, of course, we're looking at how, as I just mentioned, they compare it against the evaluation criteria that we set forth to see if their product fills a gap for us. And if it does, then the next step will be to bring in the services and make sure that they're aware of what we saw out there. And many of them came out and helped us and were out there observing as well. And so we'll see if it fills a gap and has joint interest, and then we'll come back to that potentially on-ramp process that Colonel Morgan mentioned, and compare it against what we have today. As far as the COVID impacts, your guess is as good as mine. I hope not. But we've got to make sure that we continue to show industry that there's value in having them be a part of this process to help minimize the dropouts at the last minute. But we'll see how we go forward.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And I would second that. I mean, obviously, the partnership with the industry partners is critical to this as we look for those emerging technologies that can combat the enemy threat that is also rapidly evolving. So with that, I think that's all the time we have. Really appreciate your time and your questions. We'll be in the back here if there's any follow-on questions you may have. And again, the trifold that is out there, if you didn't get one, please see us, and we've got a few extras. So thank you very much.